First this hour, we start in the Middle East, specifically in Gaza, where the humanitarian crisis is potentially deepening. At least 40 Palestinians have reportedly been killed by Israeli gunfire and airstrikes. 10 of them were trying to access aid, that according to local health authorities. Let's now listen to what some Gazans have had to say.
كله دم احمر للطحين بدناش للطحين يا اخوي خلاص حد الله ما هو رايح واحد من اولادنا بعد هيك حتى لو بنموت من الجوع خلاص نموت من الجوع احسن.
5 more people, including children, reportedly died of starvation as UN agencies warn of a looming famine. Some have highlighted the difficulties they've faced. Let's listen in once again.
شايف ابني كيف معظم من قلة الحليب ومن قلة الغذاء. مش قادر أنا يعني لما بشوف هالولاد مفتحين وحلوين أنا بصير أصيع أولادي وأنا مش قادر أجيب لهم أي حاجة يعني لا حليب ولا بامبز ولا أكل ولا شرب. أحيانا أسقي باي مغلية أحيانا بسقي ينسون نعنع بس يا عمي ما فيش بديل يعني إنه يسد عن الحليب ويسد عن الأكل والشرب وأنا صدري ما بربيش أطفال يعني ما بنزلش في حليب لأن أنا ما فيش أكل إني آكل يجي الحليب.
Burial shrouds are reportedly in short supply, with mourners being forced to wrap the dead in blankets, a reminder of the relentless toll of war. Witnesses say aid sites have become deadly zones, with more than 1,000 people reportedly killed near distribution centres since May. Israel says it's increasing access and allowing aid convoys. Many trucks remain undelivered and have been looted amid chaos and potential desperation. Well, joining us to discuss the ongoing situation in the Gaza Strip, Jordan Cope, a Middle East affairs expert who's joining us live from Dallas in the United States. Jordan, as always, a pleasure to have you on the programme. What are your reactions to these initial reports coming out of Gaza, with further deaths being reported in the enclave after strikes, further deaths being reported around aid sites as well?
It's important to understand the source where these allegations are coming from, which is the Gaza Health Ministries, which at the day is part and parcel of the Hamas-run government in the Gaza Strip. Now, this health ministry, which has so many qualms to raise when it comes to its own citizens, has mentioned yet to nothing when it comes to the hostages under Hamas's control, videos of which were released by Hamas in recent days, depicting one of them supposedly digging his own grave and the other one supposedly starving and on the cusp of death, not able to stand up because he hasn't had access to water in days. Steve Witkoff recently arrived to the Gaza Strip on behalf of the United States and noted that despite Hamas's allegations, there in fact is no starvation in the Gaza Strip. Now, this is rather a bold claim because the reality of war is one that is unfortunately ugly. However, Steve Witkoff's statement seemed to indicate that the overall myth of famine that has been perpetuated by major media outlets is one that needs to be pushed back upon, and one that likely isn't as severe as the international media is making out to be, which in recent days has shared photos of people from Gaza with medical conditions explaining their poor health conditions in the stage, while instead presenting it as famine. The Hamas Health Agency has tried to ultimately undermine Israel's operations and their legitimacy, and unfortunately in recent weeks they probably have succeeded with the international pressure that has been put on Israel. But some important facts to remember when analyzing the context of their allegations is that when Palestinians began protesting against Hamas in the Gaza Strip and Hamas realized that its days could have been numbered, they released statistics indicating that Israel at the end of that 72% of all of the casualties in the Gaza Strip were actually of males and not females, going to show that Israel has actually been rather precise in whom it is targeting. Now, a reminder that even according to the UN, 90% of all casualties in war are civilian these days, and even when fighting in one of the most densely populated areas in the world, Israel has still managed to keep the civilian to combatant ratio well below those expected in traditional warfare, and has earned the praise of military experts such as John Spencer, who have noted that Israel is defining new standards when it comes to finding in urban environments.
Yes, Jordan, I do just want to bring some balance. Of course, it's not just Hamas saying that there is a famine or Hamas-run authorities. It's the United Nations, its NGOs and its world leaders, including Donald Trump himself, who after a conversation with Keir Starmer, the United Kingdom Prime Minister, also said that it seems that there is a famine ongoing, reporting restrictions around the Gaza enclave. I mean, it is difficult to validate any of the claims that are coming out of the enclave. But I want to shift attention. You mentioned hostages, of course, that horrifying video that came out of an Israeli hostage digging what he was saying was his own grave has come out over the weekend. Is this going to raise questions amongst Israelis? Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, since saying that military operations in the enclave are going to step up, there's not been really any progress on returning any of these hostages. So Israelis looking at the Israeli administration and saying, really, your plan hasn't worked?
So it's not my plan. I'm American.
No, yours, I'm posing the question as in an Israeli person speaking to the Israeli government. We know there have been protests. Of course, I'm not aiming it to you, Jordan. I'm talking about the people looking at the Israeli government saying, this is what your plan is. There are protests in Tel Aviv and elsewhere where people are speaking out against the plan. Is there a consensus, do you think, growing, given the horrific scenes of this video that have been released and a lack of progress from the IDF in getting these hostages back?
I will answer that question. A quick pivot to your comment before then. The United States position on the situation in Gaza has changed. You referenced the Starmer-Trump meeting, but what you didn't mention was that the Witkoff visit to the Gaza Strip, where he confirmed that there is no starvation happening in Gaza, actually happened after that. Regarding United Nations, the UN is one of the biggest thorns in the aid delivery program. Ultimately, 950 UN trucks have yet to deliver food, despite being within the Gaza Strip and having access to do so, because they ultimately have grievances with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation being the leader when it comes to distributing aid in the Gaza Strip. The GHF, which has now delivered over 100 million meals, was ultimately created to help displace the monopoly that Hamas has on the aid distribution program, from which it seizes food and then sells and extorts the prices to fund itself. And so we previously knew that in towns such as Rafah, they were supposedly siphoning 60% of aid. Now, pivoting to and also not to mention, the UN itself has noted that 87% of its aid distributions and truckloads have actually been intercepted by actors such as Hamas. Pivoting now to what Israelis want and what the future of the war is going to look like. As I mentioned earlier, there's always a fog when it comes to war and how it's going to play out. It does seem, though, that Donald Trump is becoming increasingly less patient with Hamas and with the militant actors in the Gaza Strip. So is Stephen Witkoff. It seems that the Trump administration has given an ultimatum that Hamas release all the hostages and ultimately allow the Strip to be run temporarily by a US-led administration. So how this war is ultimately going to play out remains yet to be ascertained. There are rumors that Donald Trump might have even told Israeli leadership to agree to a ceasefire deal and then to backtrack on it once the hostages are freed. But the Israeli public remains very concerned, as always, with their citizens that continue to remain in Hamas control in dire conditions. It's clear that the Hamas fighters from videos are well fed from these videos. They appear to be in perfect health. I would argue in even better health than I am. It seems like their muscle tone is quite accentuated, and they are definitely getting the daily calories they need and even more. And there have been videos that have surfaced showing Hamas having near banquets in their tunnels, eating the finest of fruits, eating the finest of foods, and it's clear where that aid is going. The Israeli public ultimately probably remains divided, though, on what the next course of action is, as Israeli troop deaths are amassing in the Gaza Strip. But at the same time, the people of Israel realize that they not only need to save their citizens now, but also in the future. And that comes with making sure that Hamas, which has continued to pledge October 7th attacks again and again, can no longer exist and be able to achieve those means.
Yes, Jordan, we are short on time, but of course you've mentioned there the videos of the Hamas members eating food and looking healthy. We've also been showing on our screens visuals which we're currently showing of people starving, looking for food, babies starving, needing urgent health. Just a quick question. Do you think that the IDF and the Israeli government see everyone within Gaza as a member of Hamas and are treating everyone with the same brush?
That's obviously not true, because Israel has been working with the Abu Shabaab militia to try to get civilians into safe zones. Israel has instituted 10-hour ceasefires a day in certain areas, which is to the benefit of Hamas's fighters, ultimately with the intent of trying to save civilians. It's provided millions of evacuation notices, unlike any other country in modern-day warfare, to save civilians and to get them out of harm's way. It has also allowed the inflow of over 2 million tons of aid into the Gaza Strip, which is even more aid than when the war began. And all of this is coming despite Palestinian polls themselves suggesting that 50% of the Palestinian people still support the October 7th attacks. Israel still nonetheless has tried to save civilians as much as it can, and in one of the most densely populated areas of the world no less, ultimately causing some of its troops to die in the process by resorting to on-the-ground military tactics instead of airstrikes as often as it could.
Jordan, thank you ever so much for that insight. You will be staying with us as we pivot. We stay in the Middle East, but pivot, as Iran has said that it would hold the United States accountable for attacks